Alright, so it's been a while since I made a video. Had some shit to deal with, still dealing with it. And also because there hasn't really been anything really that interesting to speak about in the sport boxing right now, if I'm being honest with you. So what I probably will do anytime we get dry periods like that is I'll start uploading fantasy fights, what I think will happen and whatnot. As such, with these fantasy fights, I'll have to say this is my opinion. This is nothing but my opinion. What I'm saying isn't fact. It can't be a fact because these fights are never taking place. So it's nothing but my opinion. Don't take it too seriously or anything like that. And of course, you're free to disagree with me. Let me know what you think of the fights down below in the comment section if you're interested enough to do so. And let's get right into it. All right, as you can tell by the title, I think Paul Williams will beat Floyd Mayweather in a fantasy matchup. And here's why, right? Well, the main feature is his height and reach. According to BoxRec, he's 6'1", 79 inches. Apparently, it's really actually 6'2". I think I've also seen other sources claim he's in 82-inch reach is long or something like that. It's really hard to tell sometimes because BoxRec and other Alisa, they can be very inconsistent on the boxer's height and reach. As we know, for some reason, boxing just doesn't seem to be consistent with recording boxers' height and reach for some reason. They don't measure these guys really. They just seem to guess. But yeah, that's one of the reasons why I think he has the edge in the fight. Is his height and reach. Floyd has never fought anyone as tall as Paul Williams. He has never fought anyone with the reach of Paul Williams, especially with reach advantage over him. Floyd usually fights guys who have a shorter reach than him. He knows how to use his reach very well. I think there's only like 3 fighters he's fought with a longer reach than him. Oscar De La Hoya, Diego Corrales, and Conor McGregor, who he really knows isn't like a professional boxer like that. Diego Corrales did not use his height and reach. He will give it up. He will walk in without throwing any without throwing a jab. He would just walk in and give up his height and reach. De La Hoya had success when he used his jab, and that's when he was winning the rounds, but he went away from it, and that's when Mayweather was able to pick him apart from range and win the fight. And of course, with Conor McGregor, he's not a professional boxer, so there's not really much you can do about that. Now, Paul Williams, he wasn't the guy that was the great known for making the greatest use of his height and reach, but he still utilized it to some extent. You know, he would flick out a jab. He would throw up straight punches. He come at you and throw straight long punches. And, that's what often gave his opponents, trouble. Dealing with a tall guy who's very lengthy in terms of reach, coming at him throwing a lot of punches. A lot of us opponents struggled with that because someone of his size is not really usual in those weight classes and whatnot. It'll be very difficult for Mayweather to fight someone like Paul Williams because Mayweather, even though he could come forward and he did show some inside fighting skills, they were usually around guys that were around the same stature as him. Not guys who were like, we'll say Floyd's 5'8", really is 5'7", but he's around 5'7". Paul Williams is 6'1", 6'2". That's say like a that's a very long height disadvantage for Floyd. Or a different height disparity, I should say. That's a very big height disparity between the two fighters. So yeah, while he could come forward and apply pressure at times, he was never a skilled pressure fighter like that. That's not his bread and butter. His bread and butter is using his range, using this range, at long range, making use of it, not coming forward and applying the pressure towards a much bigger and longer guy. So in order for him to come forward, he would have to eat punches to get through. Now, Floyd has a very, very immaculate defense, but again, his defense is usually he usually fights guys who are around the same stature as him in terms of height or, reach. He doesn't have those advantages here. He's fighting a guy that's way taller and way bigger than him. His defense may not look as immaculate when he's fighting someone he's not really used to fighting in terms of stature. his defense may not look as impressive then. Um, and also, if he tries to fight from range, he'd also risk, eating some shots on the way out. Now, again, he's very good on the back foot. He has very good reflexes, but he's not used to doing that against someone with the height and reach of, say, a Paul Williams. He's not used to that. There's not a single opponent that you can find in Floyd's career who has that he has fought that has the a similar stature to Paul Williams. You're just not going to find any. That's just how unusual Paul Williams is in terms of his physicality at those weight divisions. To expand on the point about physicality, Floyd also will not have the same advantages in the clinches as he usually does with his opponents. Floyd is very masterful in the clinch. He's stronger than he looks. He knows what to do in the clinch. He's very good at manipulating his hands in order to get out get out get out of clinches. He knows how to use his forearms and his elbows to put his opponents in positions where he can land his punches, also that he can push him off. He's very good at that. But it'd be very, very difficult to not only do that to an opponent that's bigger than you, because Floyd has done this for opponents that are bigger than him, so it's not really as much of a problem. But opponent that has as big as Paul Williams and is taller, how is he going to do that against someone that is taller than him? It's going to be far, far more difficult for him to do that. Paul Williams will have the advantage in a clinch if they do get into clinches, because they probably will get into clinch at some point. Now, people may ask, how can Paul Williams beat Floyd Mayweather in a fantasy fight if he got outboxed by the likes of Carlos Quintana? He got outboxed by, ugly outboxed, or lost to Sergio Martinez in the first fight. And then he got knocked out cold by Sergio Martinez in a rematch. And then he got outboxed by Erislandy Lara and got a good decision. How the hell does he beat Floyd when none of those fighters are as skilled as Floyd? I agree. None of those fighters that Paul Williams ever had problems with are anywhere near on the technical skill level as Floyd Mayweather. That's just a fact. I don't think that's anything anyone would try and dispute. But the thing is, you don't necessarily have to be better technically than someone in order to give more problems than or beat them. I'm not picking Paul Williams because he's a better technical fighter than Floyd Mayweather. He's definitely not. Definitely not. So when people say, how does these fighters give Paul Williams hell, but Floyd Mayweather doesn't? Let me say this. Those fighters, the toughest fights in Paul Williams' career, were usually southpaws. And not only were they southpaws, they were also taller, had a longer reach, and are definitely bigger than Floyd Mayweather. So it wouldn't be as much of a reach for them to land punches on him as it would be for like Floyd Mayweather's like 5'7" with a 72-inch reach, and he's a lot smaller than those guys. He doesn't hit as hard as those guys. Those guys hit harder than Floyd. Now, why is them being southpaw a deal? Well, I said before, his toughest fights were against southpaws. Why is that? Why is that is this? Southpaws often have very tough fights with southpaws because they're used to going up against orthodox fighters. That's what they're used to. Southpaws are in a minority. So they know how to defend against certain punches from a southpaw. They know how to defend against left hook, or at least nullify it. They know how to nullify the jab because the lead hands are clashing, and they often have the lead foot positioning because orthodox fighters are used to training against other orthodox fighters. Southpaws are a minority. So when orthodox fighters come against a southpaw, they often have to make adjustments. They have to establish lead foot positioning. They have to, certain punches may get nullified, or have to work harder in order to land certain punches, like the jab or the left hook and whatnot. But when southpaws go against other southpaws, they're not used to training or fighting against southpaws because once again they're a minority. So they don't really know how to defend against the backhand as well as they may know how to defend against a left hook or a right hand. They may not know how to defend against a right hook coming from a southpaw as much as they know how to defend a left hook coming from an orthodox fighter. And Paul Williams, whose defense was never really that great in the first place, when you got fighters like Erislandy Lara, who has a devastating backhand, along with Sergio Martinez, and they're constantly landing on you, yeah, you will have problems. You will have problems. When you already go fire is not that great defensively, you know, and he's going up against a southpaw who knows how to throw the backhand, and he's a southpaw himself, he's going to run into issues. And that's what happened. Floyd Mayweather was an orthodox fighter. Paul Williams will know how to do better against an orthodox fighter because that's what he's used to fighting anyways. You know, he's never lost to an orthodox fighter, Paul Williams. All his toughest fights have been against other southpaws. That's not really a coincidence. Now, that's not to say that Floyd Mayweather will not land shots on him. He definitely will, because Paul Williams is a very hittable guy and he often gives up his height and reach a lot. You know, and what I mean by give it up, he often comes forward. He doesn't try and establish it at long range. He often comes forward and leaves himself in the line of fire. So Floyd Mayweather, being as accurate as he is with his counter punches, he will definitely land on Paul Williams. What I am trying to say though is that because Floyd isn't used to fighting guys of Paul Williams' height, he's not as tall as the guys that gave him problems and not as physically big, that even though he will land, he's gonna have a harder time landing, even if he's a bad technical boxer, for those reasons. You know, so those are the reasons, or partially the reasons why those guys are able to have all these successes. Is because of the fact that they're southpaw. That's not to say that every southpaw that Paul Williams fought that he struggled with. That's not what I'm trying to say at all. But what I'm saying is when he did struggle, it was often against a southpaw. Now, people may try and bring it the Antonio Margarito fight. They may say the Margarito fight was tough for him. And this and that and the other. Margarito is orthodox. Margarito is 5'11", and I think his reach is like 73 inches, 74 inches. I can't remember. Margarito is a different fight from Floyd Mayweather. Margarito is a guy that is willing to take a million punches just to land one. Floyd Mayweather ain't that kind of guy. He's not willing to come forward and take a load of punches just to land a couple. He's not really like that. He's a bit more methodical. You know, he's a bit more what's the right word? He's a bit more measured than someone like Margarito. Margarito is not really as much of a thinking fly as Floyd Mayweather. He's more willing to take risks. In the sense of like he's more willing to get hit more in order to land his own punches. That's the kind of fighter Margarito is. He doesn't care that he has to take 20 punches to land one. While Mayweather, you know, he will be a lot more methodical in his thinking. You know, way more methodical. Margarito is also bigger. He's also taller, and he also has a longer reach. You know, so it's not really exactly the same thing. You know, they're different fighters. That's not saying Margarito is better than Floyd. No, it's just to say that they're different fighters and that they have different mentalities. That's why, and for like the first half of the fight, Margarito was getting outboxed. It was until the later half, that's when Paul Williams started to slow down, Margarito started to catch up. And Margarito himself is a volume puncher. That's another thing. May was not a volume puncher, never has been, not even in the pre-boy Floyd days. Margarito will throw a lot of punches himself. You know, and that itself also had a hand in tiring Paul Williams out. Mayweather ain't that kind of fighter. You don't apply that same kind of pressure in terms of punch out, but Margarito does. And Paul Williams himself was throwing a whole heap of punches as well. So that also contributed to his fatigue, along with the fact that Margarito was also throwing a lot of punches back, and that he was willing to take them in order to throw some back. So yeah, that's the difference between those two fighters. Right. So, how do I think Paul Williams will win? I think he'll win on points, but I do think he will be tough, even for Paul Williams, even with all the advantages I list that he has, even if I list the differences and how certain fighters were able to trouble him, even if they're not as technically good as Floyd. I still think it still be somewhat of a tough fight for Paul Williams. I think I'd be 8-4, 7-5 in his favor. And the reason why is this is because Floyd knows how to make adjustments. Now, it's still going to be difficult for him to make adjustments because he's fighting such a physically big, strong, tall guy, lanky guy like Paul Williams. He will make adjustments. He knows how to land his shots. He's very accurate. You know, he's not going to make the same mistakes over and over and over again, even like Paul Williams would, which is why Floyd will be able to land several of his counter shots at points. It's because Paul Williams, he often got hit with the same shots over and over and over again without making adjustments. Now, those guys were southpaws, yes, and those guys aren't as technically good as Floyd Mayweather, yes. So Mayweather has the technical skill advantage. He still will be able to somewhat exploit it at times. I just don't think he will have the same kind of success as they did because he doesn't have the physicality. But just because he doesn't have the physicality, doesn't mean he won't be able to exploit it at times. Because Paul Williams was often easy to hit, and he often didn't know how to make adjustments to avoid getting hit afterwards. Orthodox or southpaw, when you got someone as technically skilled as Mayweather, who's also dealt with southpaws easily in prior fights, it'll be a bit odd and silly to think that he won't be able to land his biggest shots. I just think that Paul Williams will be able to beat him based on physicality and output, and the fact that Floyd Mayweather wouldn't really know how to fight a guy of Paul Williams' stature, you know. So yeah, I think I have an 8-4, 7-5 type of fight for Paul Williams. Not because he's a better technical fighter than Floyd Mayweather. He is not. It's just the physicality is too big for him. His punch output can cause Floyd problems. I mean, he's fought guys like Maidana in the past who did cause him problems in the first fight, partially because of his punch output. But I try not to use that fight because, again, Maidana's not the same size as Paul Williams. He doesn't have the same stature and whatnot. But it's one of the few fights I can remember Floyd's career where he's going up against a guy with crazy punch output that he did have a bit of issues with. There's also other factors as well why he had problems in that fight. Like there's times where he stayed on the ropes too much, instead of, using his legs like he did in a rematch. The fight was a lot easier then, So, yeah, I think I said everything. I think I laid all my points out. If you disagree, feel free to put it down in the comments below. Just to reiterate, this is nothing but my opinion. I'm not saying this is a fact. It's just what I think. And yeah, I'm out.